I'm getting pretty good at wearing a mask. There was a time a few months ago when the mayor first issued his order making mask wearing mandatory for Marion County that I would constantly leave the house and realize that I'd forgotten to grab a mask. And I'd have to run back inside and get one, just on the off chance that I did encounter another human being while walking my dog or grabbing a book from the church office across the street, or rarest of rare things, deliberately going into an inside space like a store. But now it's just a habit. Leave the house, grab a mask. I feel like I see more and more people wearing them now, which I find comforting. Maybe we can do this one thing after all. I've also developed a good gas station routine. I slip a glove on one hand, open the gas cap, and slide the credit card in. The card then goes directly from the card reader into my pocket, where I don't touch it again. Then I enter the PIN, select the grade, handle the fuel nozzle, all with the gloved hand. Return the nozzle, slip the glove off and throw it directly into the trash, and then close the gas cap with a clean hand. When I get into the car, I hit my hands with a blast of hand sanitizer before I turn the key again to start the car, just in case. Now, I don't know how that description strikes you. Does that sound silly? Like overkill? Does that sound familiar, reassuring, wearying, like a waste of time? At home, the debit card comes out of my pocket and it can either sit in quarantine on my dresser for a day, or I can wipe it off with a Clorox wipe. And then I wash my hands. I'm actually not so worried about the debit card anymore, as it's becoming clearer that the coronavirus mostly does not spread through casual contact with surfaces and contaminated objects. I used to handle my debit card post-transaction with the care one might handle an angry snake or at least an unfamiliar insect. These days, not so much. But still, why take chances? It can sit on my desk for a day. Why take chances? We're all taking chances all the time, and we all have a different calculus of which risks make sense and how best to handle them. We are, all of us these days, constantly making risk calculations. Is it safe to go into this store? Is it safe to attend to this outdoor, socially distanced interaction? How much risk at the hairdresser, the gym, the library? How much risk am I exposed to if I just pop into the office? What if I'm working in an office every day? Or a classroom, or an auto shop, or a grocery store? We all have to accept some risks. So we all are making our own individual calculations of what risk level we can accept. And then hopefully we are taking steps to minimize the risks that we can. And that looks different for each of us. These days, I take my mail directly upstairs and just open it. I open my mail with reckless abandon, like I'm going to live forever. Then, I wash my hands. When our groceries show up on our front porch, we have them delivered. I haven't been inside a grocery store in months, which I recognize is a privilege. But then when the groceries come, I just put them away, like no big deal. I'm handling my own groceries. Once upon a time, by which I mean a few months ago, there was a whole elaborate grocery routine with the dry stuff set aside to quarantine for a few days, and then I was sort of furiously wiping down the cold stuff with disinfectant wipes before it went into the fridge. Remember that? Remember disinfecting the outside of the milk container? I don't do that anymore, thank heavens. I do wash my hands afterwards. I'm getting pretty good at washing my hands. I'm lousy at not touching my face. Here's some other things I'm getting pretty good at. Meditating. I meditate pretty much every day now. It helps. We have a morning meditation every day during the week at UUI, 10 a.m. on Zoom. You're welcome to join us. It helps. I'm getting pretty good at not watching the news during the day. I get a single recap in the evening, like we used to do back in the days of yore, before the 24/7 media cycle. It helps. I'm getting pretty good at remembering to get outside and walk every day, to get some fresh air and exercise. For me, these are all resilience practices. Our story that we read today of Frederick the Mouse by Leah Leone named some other practices good for surviving long winters and pandemics of unknown duration equally. Beauty, connection, shared memories, engaging the body and the senses. What are your resilience practices? How are you keeping your spirits up? And more importantly, how are you allowing your spirits to come down? Because they are going to come down. And that can be a crash landing or a soft landing. How are you preparing a soft landing for your spirits? Are you storing up kindness? Are you stockpiling second chances? The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services describes 6 phases of a public health crisis. 6 phases. The first 2 phases deal with the immediate impact of a crisis, when people absorb the shock that an emergency is actually happening, like all around them right now. That's the first 2 phases. In phases 3 and 4, people respond to this threat, this emergency. At first, with a lot of energy and altruism and heroism, but not always with a lot of efficacy. For example, scrubbing milk cartons with Clorox wipes. Good energy, questionable impact. But then resources and information begin to be distributed, disaster assistance is made available, relationships are built and bonding occurs, and the community adrenaline level begins to come down from those first 2 phases. This phase of the crisis, which Health and Human Services calls the honeymoon phase, is characterized by a high level of optimism that the crisis will soon be over. And then comes the next phase, phase 5, disillusionment. This is when people realize that recovery is going to take longer than expected. And in this phase, optimism becomes discouragement. Stress rises. Mental health becomes strained. People can become physically worn down in this phase. Communal health suffers. The transition from phase 4 to phase 5, from optimism to disillusionment, is hard on people. It's hard on people. Optimism, it turns out, can be a double-edged sword in times of crisis. In normal times, in ordinary circumstances, a generally positive outlook on life has benefits. It can lower stress, improve our mood, enhance our enjoyment of life, and energize us. But a belief that things generally work out okay can be downright dangerous in a pandemic. If we believe that generally things will turn out okay, we are prone to take more risks. Our optimism can cause us to cheat on our own risk calculations. We can pretend a risk isn't really a risk by saying, "Oh, I'm sure it will be fine." Again, we have to accept some level of risk. But if we optimistically assume that each risk will turn out in our favor, we can let small risks pile up, almost as though they aren't really risks at all, until we are taking a lot more risk than we really want. Optimism is a good strategy for short-lived struggles. Optimism keeps our spirits up through hard times. But optimism also encourages us to think the hard times will be over sooner than they actually will be. When stresses or challenges truly are short-lived, the mindset that this will all be over soon can be a very effective way of marshaling our resources. But when the crisis stretches on and stretches on and stretches on, and that optimistic expectation is disappointed, optimism can then become disillusionment or even despair. In the case of this pandemic, when we are facing so much uncertainty, too much optimism can cause us to remain trapped, bouncing between phases 4 and 5, between confidence and disillusionment. Once upon a time, we were told we just have to make it to May with this pandemic. And then everything was going to open up again. And there was like this careful, detailed schedule for how normal life was going to resume over the course of 6 to 8 weeks as we phased in this reopening. And by July, things would be mostly normal. And that didn't happen. Once upon a time, not too long ago, movie studios were setting August release dates for their summer blockbuster movies to arrive in theaters, and those have been shelved. Many schools are setting timelines for resuming physical classes in October or November, setting up another mental milestone for parents to deal with. We've been told that maybe this winter we'll see a vaccine. And if that seems unrealistic, many of us have it in the back of our minds that surely if we can just get to the spring, there will be a vaccine. And the reality is, we don't know. We don't know about any of this. And that is a very difficult thing to deal with, the not knowing. Maybe that light is the end of the tunnel, and maybe it is another train. And when you don't know, optimism may not be your friend. Proceed with caution. And the alternative to optimism isn't fear, but realism. And as Unitarian Universalists, we can be hopeful realists. 2 weeks ago, the Reverend Aisha Ansano preached to us about hope. We are a religion of hope. We see the energies of hope operating in the world all around us through human creativity and intelligence, in individual acts of care and kindness, through the earth's natural resilience, and through the power of love to transform lives and build and bolster communities. We believe hope is ultimately justified. Cornel West said in a 1993 commencement address at Wesleyan University that he did not believe in optimism, but he was a prisoner of hope. He was a prisoner of hope. But hope has a long timeline. It doesn't know so much about the day-to-day. It doesn't deliver on our schedule. And hope doesn't promise that hard times won't get harder. It promises that even amidst the hard times, amidst the very hardest times, love is still operating in the world. Compassion still makes sense. Kindness still heals, and we still have one another. I'm an optimist by instinct. I come by it naturally, but these days I am trading in my optimism for hopeful realism. I don't know what this next year holds, or the year after that, or the year after that. I don't know when we get to phase 6, the phase of rebuilding and recovery. But as our opening reading said by the Reverend Teresa Soto, persistence doesn't require all the answers up front, only one: to stick together. I trust in this community. I trust that we are held in more love than we know. And I'm leaving my debit card on the dresser for a day, just in case. Blessed be, and amen.